Webinar is on storage and distribution practices and really how to get started, as well as sharing best practices that we've learned throughout the years and being able to share those with you. It'll be myself today. I cover food safety training and consulting for SCS. I have 26 years in the food business and all things from manufacturing to retail, and a lot of time in the storage and distribution portion of the supply chain, helping out in that aspect. So I'm looking forward to this webinar. We also have Hilda Bryan with us. She is our Senior Auditing Manager for Food Safety Audits. She is ultimately going to cover those key elements of this process for storage and distribution, provide you some deeper dives into what's important and the key activities and scopes for the audit. She leads the recruitment efforts as well for auditors within SCS's Global Gap and Primus GFS and other food safety programs. So you are in good hands today. Just about SCS, we are a global service provider and we offer not only food safety, but environmental and sustainability certifications, as well as product claims like organic and non-GMO. We also have our certification side that offers even the life cycle management assessments, training, and strategic consulting. Our key topics today will be storage and distribution audit scheme options. What is available for you guys to consider and choose from? So we're gonna provide you the top ones that hopefully will give you some insight into which might be a good fit. Then we'll dive into the importance of understanding the scope of your audit and how that does match what key criteria will be audited and what you need ultimately to comply. Then we will switch over to giving you some tips and best practices for developing and implementing your food safety system in that kind of supply chain of storage and distribution function. As we know, it's going to look different than a food safety plan that we would do for a processed food, but that doesn't mean it isn't important, and it is a critical piece to success of your audit. So we'll cover those components, and then, as I mentioned, jump into Q&A. So we'll start off though with a poll question. We'll go ahead and get that launched for you guys. Go. So what type of food safety audits do you currently, or audit do you currently have? Perhaps you already are GFSI and are joining us to kind of get a little bit more inside tips on how to better prepare, or you're about to be GFSI. Maybe you already have a GMP, GAP, or GDP audit. Maybe it's third party, global markets, or other. So if there is other, feel free to put that in the chat box. Okay, I see a good portion of you. Answering here. We'll just give just a few more seconds, and then we'll close and share those results. Okay, and if it's not applicable, feel free to just put none. All right, let's go ahead and close that poll and share those results. All right. So 87% of you are GFSI compliant. So, or you're on that, you've already signed up to be audited. So that is great to hear. Hopefully we can provide you some best practices to really get prepared for that. And then I see 8% are in that GMP, HACCP, GDP type of food safety audit, which is also great because we are going to share with you some insights on the Global Food Safety Initiative and maybe the importance of switching over to that more robust standard. So I will pass that over to Hilda to be able to provide us her insights on this process and the importance. Go ahead, Hilda.
Thank you, Denise. Well, it's good to see that a large majority of you have GFSI benchmark audits. So what we're going to start with will probably be very familiar to you. We're going to begin with why it's important that your operation is audited. Audits provide visibility into a complex global supply chain as food moves through different points, including storage and distribution centers, before it ends up on a shelf in a grocery store or on a plate at a restaurant. This journey that food takes from the facility to the consumer can have potential challenges, and unfortunately, we can no longer simply trust that supply chain controls are in place without verification. Developing robust systems can help establish a foundation of requirements, set expectations, and identify risks to reduce vulnerability, all of which can be verified by an audit. Undergoing a third-party audit helps ensure the safety and integrity of the supply chain that you're a part of. So let's discuss a few different types of audits that a storage and distribution center can undergo. Just for a little background, the Global Food Safety Initiative, or GFSI, recognized audits are accredited against ISO IEC 17065 or 17021. These standards both address issues such as preventing conflicts of interest, managing customer information, and qualifying personnel. In addition, the certification bodies that complete these audits must be assessed by accreditation bodies. This provides a proven framework of checks and balances that significantly improves the rigor and consistency of the audit and certification process. As GFSI says, once certified, recognized everywhere. There is a GFSI scope that's specific to storage and distribution called the Provision of Storage and Distribution Services, and a few of the GFSI benchmark schemes that can audit this scope include SQF, BRCGS, Primus GFS, and Global Gap PHA. There are other GFSI benchmark schemes such as FSSC 22000 that could also be used to audit storage and distribution centers. In addition to the GFSI benchmark certification programs, there are some non-GFSI benchmark programs that a facility could be audited against. These include HACCP, GMP, and GHP audits that are performed by a certification body as a starting point for a facility in building and implementing their food safety programs. SCS offers a couple of audit programs that fall under this category that storage and distribution centers can complete. For facilities, including S&Ds that mostly sell fruit and vegetable products, we offer the SDS pre-processing GMP standard. And then for storage and distribution centers that carry a range of food products, not only produce, we also offer the SCS Good Distribution Practices standard. And for those who sell to Costco, Costco accepts the SCS GDP audit for suppliers. Let's now talk about the importance of scoping operations to identify the best scheme for them. When we are scoping an operation, we need to take into account the key activities and product types present at the operation to ensure the audit is properly scoped and to avoid exclusions. We want to avoid exclusions as they can impact how you promote your audit certification. It's important that we obtain as much information as possible from a site about the key activities that occur as well as the product types. Several key activities and product types are on your screen. These can include anything from, is cross-stacking occurring? Are there separate staging areas that have different temperature zones? And product types, that require different storage conditions, such as produce ripening rooms or modified atmosphere, for example. The complexity of the audit is determined by the key activities and product types, and this will dictate aspects like audit duration and timing, as well as ensuring that the right auditor is assigned to your audit. So it's important that you share as much about your operation as possible to ensure the best audit standard is chosen and proper scoping occurs. Let's talk a little bit more in detail about a few of the GFSI benchmarked audit schemes that can be used for storage and distribution centers. So the BRCGS storage and distribution audit provides a unique and comprehensive approach to this sector of the food supply chain. The standard applies to a wide range of products from food, packaging materials, and consumer products. The standard requires an evaluation of hazards and risk analysis to determine the basis for the management system. The majority of the requirements apply to all sectors, but with specific clauses that might be excluded based on your scope. There are also additional voluntary modules that can be added on around e-commerce and cross-docking. This standard can be applied at any point in the distribution chain with multiple key activities. Additionally, it includes produce in all forms, including open containers. SQF Edition 9 follows their overall approach to their main food safety code with a focus for storage and distribution, which includes the base of Module 2 Food Safety System, and then a specific Module 12 for the GDP for transport and distribution of food products. The code applies to dedicated distribution centers, warehouses, and transport operators involved in the receipt, storage, consolidation, and distribution of perishable fresh product and general food lines, including chilled, frozen, dry goods, shelf-stable, pre-processed, and packaged foods. It's important to know that SQF will be moving to Edition 10 by this time next year, and there are likely to be some key changes for consideration. Primus GFS facilities are required to complete modules 1, 5, and 6, with module 7 optional to include preventative controls. Whether a facility is defined as a storage and distribution center or a cooling and cold storage facility is determined by key activities. Generally speaking, if a product is already labeled, the operation is essentially box in, box out, and no additional work is occurring, the facility is scoped to storage and distribution. However, if there are additional steps in the process, such as hydro or vacuum cooling, the facility is scoped to cooling and cold storage. The scoping affects the applicability of questions in Module 5. And then Global GAP PHA covers pre-processing production steps after the point of harvest for crops on the Global GAP product list. This includes cooling, packing, repacking, handling, and storage of crops for human consumption, and excludes any products significantly transformed from its original whole state or foods that are processed or altered. For storage and distribution centers, activities may include storage, staging, loading, and labeling. Global GAP does require that facilities are audited under PHA, to handle Global GAP certified products, meaning that they are Global GAP IFA or HPSS certified, but the facilities can also handle non-Global GAP certified products alongside the certified products. As you can tell, scheme selection can depend on many factors, and we encourage you to evaluate the requirements, structure, and ask your industry peers for their own experiences. Now that you know some basics on a few GFSI benchmarked audit standards, let's talk about some key audit requirements. Here we have highlighted some requirements that are key to success in implementing a program that is compliant with your chosen standard. Some of the key audit requirements include facility and equipment design and hygiene, food safety and HACCP plan, your food safety policy and commitment, the traceability and record controls, your internal audit program, allergen management and crisis management, your food defense plan, and your training program. These different areas of your food safety program require developing policies, procedures, and templates for records. Additionally, it is important to form key stakeholder teams to not only divide and conquer the different areas, but because many of the standards require various teams to adequately implement the programs and ensure continuous compliance with them. Speaking specifically on storage and distribution centers, it's important to recognize that a storage and distribution audit is not only about shipping and receiving procedures and GMPs. It consists of these key activities while taking into account the product types and storage conditions of the S&D facility. With the knowledge of a few different audit standards and key audit requirements, let's now talk about the audit application process. We suggest that you evaluate the different schemes by downloading their audit standard documents from their website or asking your certification body for them. If you have any questions about specific schemes, you can reach out to the scheme owners or your certification body with those questions. And once you decide the scheme that you wish to use for your storage and distribution audit, selecting a certification body and completing their application is the next step to receive a quote. Additionally, any trainings that are still required to be in compliance with your chosen audit standards should be obtained, and be sure to complete a pre-assessment either yourself or through a certification body to determine where you're at in complying with the program requirements. Once you've done that, schedule your audit when you're ready and per standard requirements. If you are unsure of which scheme is best for your facility, please contact your certification body to assist in scoping and scheme identification. If you choose to work with SDS, contact information will be provided towards the end of the webinar. We now have another poll question to get your thoughts on what you need to commit to being audited against a GFSI benchmarked audit standard.
Thank you, Hilda. The poll is open. We'll give it a few more seconds here, and then we will take a look at those results. Right. Closing the poll, and we'll share those results. So looks like most of you, 73%, are in that all the above, and I couldn't agree more. That commitment, it is not just threefold, it's tenfold. But if we were to prioritize this, yes, 14% of you mentioned management commitment, and we will talk about that in the slide and kind of dive into what does that look like. We say management commitment in terms of something we want and need and know we need to have, but do we know what that really means in real life? So we'll cover that. I also see 9% just more resources. So how do we maybe optimize the resources that we have? And maybe in some cases, yes, we do need more resources to achieve this commitment. And 5% of you to understand the implementation process. That is one of those key areas where we'll also talk about in the importance of training your team through that journey. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts there. And Hilda for providing us a deeper dive into that audit process, especially all the different schemes that are available and what selection might be applicable for you. So what I'd like to now cover is just some helpful tips and best practices around audit preparation. One of the early stumbling blocks in a storage and distribution facility is usually its setup. To ensure the facility is designed to support effective hygiene of employees. It's really about just getting the basics down. Because you mostly are not going to be doing any kind of product handling or open exposed handling, although some of you might have that in your scope, we tend to not think about the importance of hand washing. But to move to that more robust GFSI and overall following that consistency of the supply chain and making sure that we do put hygiene first, no matter what, we do need to make sure we have enough hand wash stations. Sometimes when I go to an initial distribution or storage facility that wants to get audited, that's one of our first kind of CapEx improvement programs because we need to install some more hand wash stations specifically at that entrance. And then of course requiring and training and reinforcing the importance of hand washing before they start work, after their breaks, when they come back from their shift, and of course anytime they're handling product if you have that within your scope. In addition, hairnets. Are hairnets required? That's a big question I usually get. It really depends on the activities and the area in which we're referring to. So you might decide, no, everyone's going to wear a hairnet because we have one area that's potentially exposed. Or you might decide that if we have a repack area or open produce area, that we only need hairnets and maybe even possibly gloves, depending on again the scenario of what you're handling, to reduce that risk of hair getting into that product stream. So really setting those basic requirements down, including what type of clothing is needed to protect the food being handled. We want to set basic requirements such as what's allowed and what's not allowed in clothing, and make sure we properly communicate that to the team so they're fully briefed in advance of starting their employment with your business. Same with jewelry. This one is what I see as the most violations in a storage and warehouse facilities. We've got, guys on forklifts with big, heavy gold chains or jewelry, earrings. So really, do we need to allow jewelry at all? Can we, just set some basic requirements, which ultimately can become the fabric of how we operate with that company, and all of the employees then understand that that is the condition for employment, even if it's not a direct potential risk. It's about setting that food safety culture, and that we are working in and around food, even if it's in protected boxes. Now, ultimately, with the GFSI code requirements, they are risk-based, so you do have to take into consideration what each scheme or the scheme that you select requires in this area. That also includes having dedicated areas for storage, personal belongings, lunches, breaks. If you do allow on-site premise anywhere for smoking or vaping, that's dedicated. There's hand washing. Where are the truck drivers coming in? Are they corralled? These are the basics sometimes that brought us from really moving forward into a GFSI, because we've got to get these right first. Okay, the second preparation tip is what you guys had mentioned as a key concern and thing that we need, which is that management commitment. What does this look like? Well, understanding that senior managers in the operation need to know what the mission and vision is of the company, that they set that direction, and that it is committed by all management, that everyone wants to ensure these best practices, whether it be everybody has to wear hairnets to, we're going along the journey of GFSI compliance. So once we're compliant, we have to maintain our compliance. It's not about a one-time audit. It's about ongoing being audit ready every day, and that importance. And if we're not visible with our mission, vision, policy statement, management communicating the importance on an ongoing basis, then we can start kind of seeing it not living and breathing on a daily basis. That does also mean put the resources where the voice is, right? That they are providing those people resources, financial resources to maybe improve the structure or invest in better traceability systems. Maybe, even simple things like switching to a color code area, or getting, better racking so we can segregate certain things, and also for just cleanability. So you have to identify what is important. And yes, management needs to commit to getting those resources. And maybe it's a journey. There's things we're going to get done this year, and then things we're going to continue to grow, which does mean we have to set and focus on priorities. We can't get everything done in preparation, but we can get the key elements done. Some of the other items for GFSI compliance is we do require food safety policy. So that is not just that mission and vision statement, but it's the what, the why, the who, and the how. We also have now with GFSI the food safety culture component, where we have to assess the behaviors of the operation. What does good look like? Look at the mindset, possibly do surveys and other initiatives to understand where we're at in the food safety culture and where do we want to get to. And then there's just some tactical things management needs to do on an ongoing basis to achieve success, such as monthly and annual team meetings, signatures of those policies, sign off on procedures, do the challenge studies. We'll talk about some of these in later slide. Ultimately, to engage and empower employees at all levels to ensure effective implementation. Step 3 is increased inspections. I hate to say it, but we do just need to audit ourselves more, right? We need to increase our own internal inspections so we can see the deficiencies before an auditor comes to our site, that we have enough opportunity to fix things by being tough on ourselves. Some of the key things are around the facility structure and layout. Is the equipment condition, and does it need to be repaired? Are we finding temporary repairs? These are easy non-conformances that we don't want to give the auditor. We want to be able to have identified those ourselves. They're with work orders or CapEx plans closed. We can show that we've dedicated those resources to get those completed. And then in addition, not only are we talking about food safety culture and providing them the good manufacturing or good hygiene practices, but are we complying? Are we hanging out in all the areas and observing? Are we having any deficiencies with either a team, a shift, or an individual that perhaps maybe didn't understand the importance or the requirements of good manufacturing practices? And that includes just general housekeeping. Is there a lot of wood pallet pieces laying all around? Are the plastic film wrap rolls just stored haphazardly? We want to look for those things as they are red lights to an auditor that there is not good housekeeping practices or controls. Everything needs to have a home. So do you have a place for those film rolls, right? Or are they everywhere? Do we have dedicated bins placed in each aisle for wood to be easily picked up and put in there? We got to think about these best practices and how we can make it easier on the employees to follow versus just walking by that broken pallet or those pieces, or just for ease popping in that film roll on the floor or tucked behind something. And then following procedures. You all are going to have multiple procedures, so we do have to inspect those procedures as part of our internal audit requirements for GFSI. Are they accurate as they're written? Are they being followed? Are there any opportunities for improvement? And then also we need to prove it. We need to make sure our records are robust and that they match our practices and procedures, and that we can have robust traceability. You are a vital sector of the global supply chain, and we need to be able to ensure that when a company brings a product into your operation, that then it's connected to where it went out into the supply chain. So in the event of a recall, outbreak, or something other non-conforming issues, we know where that product went. And then also I would encourage you to go out and check your incoming, outgoing shipments. Just observe a few from time to time. See how the interaction is between that driver and your personnel. Where are they going? What are they doing? You know, are the docks sealed? That's usually a big non-conformance, especially on some of these GFSI audits where we don't have good dock seals or controls to minimize that issue. And then lastly, pest control. Working with your pest control provider to ensure that they're an active part of understanding how you can improve your overall operation and ensure pests do not become an issue. I could tell you lots of stories there, as you guys probably all have experienced in warehousing and distribution. So this pest control is not to be taken lightly. 4 is our HACCP food safety plans. This is really going to vary depending on that product type and the activities that Hilda mentioned in the scope of your audit. Perhaps you are just receiving, storing, shipping. Maybe you're just doing an ambient, so you just have one HACCP plan. But maybe you have ambient, refrigerated, and frozen. So now you have 3, right, for those scenarios. Maybe you bring in fresh or frozen seafood and need a seafood HACCP plan. So definitely want to make sure you're meeting your regulatory requirements and understanding what you need, as well as having a food safety team. You want at least one qualified individual that has gone through seafood HACCP, preventive control training, whatever it happens to be relevant to your operation. And then that additional team, if they're not formally trained, at least qualified and trained by that 1 or 2 people that have that formal training on file. It is actually a requirement for that Seafood HACCP Alliance and compliant with FDA and USDA. Also, you will have to, through that process of developing your food safety HACCP plans, identify if you have any critical control points. Most storage and distribution companies don't have anything that constitutes that level of critical control point, and maybe you have control points. Although it is your choice based on how you are going to control a particular hazard and based on the severity and likelihood outcome of exactly where these might be. Is it at the point of receiving? Is it the point of storage? Where is it? And this is an area where we do need to strengthen as the FDA regulations continue to grow on supply chain requirements and data tracking and being able to not only know where the food went and what the lot codes are and the key data activity points, but also what is the temperature from when it was received to shipped over a 12, 18-hour drive. So monitoring and record keeping, these are some areas where we definitely need to strengthen and our storage and distribution and just general transportation process. This does include those data monitors that can record temperature and you can download them. You might have an alarm system that comes up on your phone or like the Emerson system. And we need to make sure our thermometers or our IR guns that we're using for receiving and shipping are NIST traceable. They are more expensive, I'm not going to lie, but it's important to make sure you have at least a handful of NIST traceable thermometers then that you're using to calibrate your more cheaper guns, or just have all of them with the NIST traceable certificate and then of course calibrated on the right frequency. All of this is vital to ensuring an effective food safety HACCP plan. Okay, 5 is challenging your systems. Well, we talked about internal audits and assessing, but GFSI does have some key requirements of things that you might have not considered, which is you do have to conduct a mock recall and traceability exercises. You might experience normal recalls from your customers having to execute a recall, and those are great also test, but also try to test different scenarios and make sure your warehouse management system, your inventory control systems, your team really know how to trace, and that it does lock out a product, that if we do put something on hold, it's not going to mysteriously become off hold and get shipped out to the customer. So that is an area where it's not just once a year, although the GFSI standards do say annually do this activity. I'm going to continue to just shout that this should be done more than annually, because this is the best way to make sure you're compliant and your systems are working. Some other challenges to your system is your food defense plan and your site security. We did offer a webinar on this if you want more information from a general food defense requirement for GFSI, but it does require you to conduct a vulnerability assessment. And although site security is something we always think about when we are assessing food defense, we also have to look at that inside attacker, that potential for someone to have exposure to the product. Although right now, FDA IAVA rule, warehouse and distribution companies are exempt from having an IAVA, although it is a great tool to include and think about, not just letting the bad guy in, but if that bad guy is already an active employee, how do we protect the food? We also have some other systems that you do need to challenge annually, which is your crisis management, risk assessment, and mitigation plans. So you're going to run a scenario. The best one here to start off with is like a power outage. If you lose power and you've got refrigerators and freezers that you have to maintain, what would you do about it? Do you have backup generators? Do you have a third-party company already identified? What would you do with the product if it reached above 45 degrees? Having these kind of crisis scenarios will also help to identify any gaps in your system. So if it ever does happen in real life, it'll be reduce the cost of potential failure because you didn't test it or assess it. And there are other crises like weather events and so forth. Also, to evaluate your product hazards, making sure that we understand what we're handling. Do we handle things that could be easily broken and that could have an allergen impact? Although, you're not processing the food, you're not labeling it, do you need to do some allergen segregation? It depends on your evaluation and your risk. Chemicals. Do you store or ship household chemicals or any chemicals as a whole? Is that next to product? I was in a distribution center a few months back, and it was kind of more that e-commerce scenario. And there was a bottle of, scented bleach next to a bottle of Rice Krispie treats. And, we've got that potential crossover of odor, potential chemical contamination. That includes non-food, like things with batteries, hard lines. Really look at your products that you're offering and make sure that you reduce those risks. And you can only do this, again, through really challenging your system and also going out and observing. Pest control trends, I talked about the importance here. Take a look, are you seeing an issue? GFSI also requires you to do an annual reassessment. This means someone different than the pest control inspector that comes to your site on a weekly or monthly basis. That's usually their boss or someone in their organization that does this and comes out and really takes a strong look at your program to make sure it is robust and gives you a pretty paperwork to then be able to present to the auditor as well. And lastly, all of your third-party service providers, don't just rely on them, verify that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Your SMOC providers, are they giving you clean, untorn SMOCs, the right amount? Are they picking up? Really challenge those so you don't get a silly nonconformance because your third-party service provider wasn't doing their job to support your needs. Also, just some additional preparation tools. As Hilda mentioned, you can download the schemes. You can also download the interpretation guides, guidance documents, checklists to be able to use for those internal audits. Also, I would encourage you to look at, for any of the scheme that you have, the glossary. Make sure you have the vernacular specific to that scheme, because it will vary. It's not the same across to the GFSI. Although they all are benchmarked to a higher degree, they are all unique within the way they approach things and their origin of how their scheme was created. So make sure you are using all of these tools that are available to you to help you comply or start to obtain GFSI certification. With that said, it always seems like it's a countdown clock to your audit, whether it's your next audit or getting GFSI, and it can be pretty stressful. So I would encourage you to really look at goal setting, having a timeline that's aligned with the audit date. If someone said, okay, well, we're going to be audited by September, and you're just now starting here in July, that's not a lot of time to get all those things done that we talked about and to be successful. So make sure It's aligned with the key needs and priorities, as well as set key performance indicators. We're going to do, have all our procedures reviewed or up to date or developed by this date. We're going to then internal audit them against this date. We're going to do our crisis management in October, really set a plan for success and then measure it to make sure, are we meeting our plans? You can use things like SMART goal setting that really help you accomplish and stay focused on task, and it also help you to break it down into those key goals and deliverables. Also, with goal setting, there are some GFSI requirements, such as making sure you do have food safety culture objectives. That is not a one point in time. That is going to be kind of a plan or a program over the course of 1 to even up to 5 years. So you want to really look at your scheme requirements for food safety objectives and know that it's a journey. And our goal there is to get to, yes, the holy grail of food safety culture, but what does that even look like for operation? And what little steps can we take to start shifting the value, the behavior, and the mindset of our employees to want to wash their hands upon entry into our warehouse? Employee communication, frequent, often, simple, one-point lessons, consistent check-ins, that will really help you be successful. If you just talk about your audit once a year, 3 months before you get it, you have to get it done or something of that nature, you're not going to be truly successful in its implementation. So it does have to be frequent and often in many different types of approaches. And then just have that continuous improvement mindset. There's always room for improvement, even if you're a AA plus BRC site. There's always an opportunity, and putting your mindset to this will really help with the business growth. It'll give your customers and consumers confidence and trust in your operation. And ultimately, doing this will also help to improve your audit scores over the long run and hopefully create a positive change for your organization. And that storage and distribution companies are important in this process, almost very critical to it. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at some questions that you guys might have. So let's see here. Okay, so I just have one here, Hilda, on, if you don't mind, on audit duration. What's the typical length of a storage and distribution audit? How is that calculated? Is it shorter?
Unfortunately, we can't say that it's shorter, even though some storage and distribution operations may be on the quote unquote simple side. We still have to do observations and document review. So durations can be, the same or as if you were handling product. So it could be half a day, a whole day, or even multiple days, depending on the size and complexity of your operation.
Perfect. So really it depends. Even though the facilities, you might not be processing, repacking, really, right? It does just depend on that size and number of employees, and some S&Ds are very large, and so that adds to that complexity. So we definitely want to factor knowing that and working with the CB in advance. We have a question here on GMPs. So, GMPs, GDPs, GAPs, all three of those acronyms are used kind of interchangeably. When we're in a S&D facility, sometimes we use GDPs, good distribution practices, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the traditional, what we call GMPs, which is the hand washing, glove use and hairnet where we're handling open food, that we have, good housekeeping practices. So it is kind of used interchangeably, but there are different programs, that need to be put in place. And you can call them, whatever you want to call it, as long as the outcome is the same. here we have a question on food defense or our threat assessment or vulnerability assessment. Again, those two terms can be sometimes used interchangeably. So can a threat assessment, CCP, be used instead of IAVA? So great question. So for storage and distribution practices that are FDA registered, you are right now exempt from IAVA unless you are opening product and handling products. And you're doing some sort of repack activity where there is that potential risk, then you have to have that IAVA assessment done. And that vulnerability assessment uses things like the key activity types, 3 elements, and if those are all foreign words to you guys and you think it's needed, there is a course. We offer that course. A threat assessment, CCP or a TACCP versus VACCP, it really is the same. FDA calls it VACCP. Some people call it TACCP. It is just the ability to evaluate and conduct a vulnerability assessment to determine if you have any vulnerabilities. Then when you've identified if you have any vulnerabilities, you're determining if any of those are significant vulnerabilities. To what? To someone creating a wide-scale public health harm. Someone that wants to contaminate the food, not for economic gain, that's food fraud, but for that potential to cause significant illnesses or even deaths and impact the food supply chain. So yes, you can use different tools. There's the old Carver method, which is complicated, but you do have options if you're not FDA IAVA. Okay, Hilda, this one's for you. Where can I find a perfect audit checklist for a food facility? Like how do they get a hold of the checklist that an auditor would use? What should they use as their guidance? And do we have expectation manuals?
Yes, so each of the audit schemes are BRCGS, SQF, Primus GFS, Global Gap, FSSC 22000. They each have their own website, and on those websites you will find lots of resources, including the checklists that auditors use when they're conducting the audit. And there are also other documents that include interpretation guidelines, compliance criteria explanations. The terminology varies by standard, but there are several documents to help you interpret the audit checklist so that you know what an auditor is looking for when they're conducting an audit.
Perfect. This one also, I believe, would be good, which is, would a GFSI audit for dietary supplement distribution be more or less the same scope as food distribution? So is there a difference if I'm, distributing dietary supplements versus food?
So you might be able to speak on this a little bit more with BRC and SQF. So for certain standards, you wouldn't be able to use that standard for the dietary supplement distribution. I don't believe, for example, Global Gap, you would not be able to do the Global Gap PHA standard for that type of product. But for standards like BRC or SQF, they have their scoping where they can include different products like the dietary supplement to have an audit for the storage and distribution. So this is where it's important to know your product type and which standard can apply to that product type.
Yeah, even on that, to your point, BRC does include consumer products, even non-food, in their applicable scope to be included. And for SQF, they do have their own, dietary supplement module. But then, in addition, this is the storage and distribution, which should cover that. But you would definitely want to reach out to your scheme and or your certification body to get clarity on that scope. And that's why it's hard to both Hilda and myself to really tell you exactly what, a duration would be or what could be covered, because it is dependent on the scheme you've selected, as well as a lot of factors of what you're doing in your operation. So you want to really partner with your certification body to get your answers for that. All right, a couple more questions here. What are the basic requirements for storage and distribution about jewelry if we receive box in, box out for the product? So it's a quick answer. It's risk-based, right? You have to identify where is the risk as it relates to the food. You have to substantiate that. So for example, an SQF code requires you to write our clothing and hair risk assessment and basically be able to justify why or why not you allow certain things or don't allow certain things. Same with the BRC side. It does require that hazard assessment based on risk. They usually are not super prescriptive in certain things, because it is going to dependent on things like, yes, if I'm only doing box in, box out, is it allowed? But then I would encourage you, just from a best practice standpoint, think about employee safety, think about just the overall food safety culture. And if I'm able to wear jewelry, is that a risk in other ways? I kind of think beyond what scheme tells me, and I try to look at what do we want as a business to create that sense of, yes, we are around food, and things like jewelry would be something we maybe wouldn't want to condone. But take a look at your scheme and know that it is risk-based. Okay, on the global gap or premise, any thoughts there on the jewelry component, Hilda?
Global gap is risk-based, and Primus GFS does not allow any jewelry beyond a writing band.
Okay, so we've got one that's more strict. Okay, perfect. Last question, unless anybody has some more to get in there in the last minute or so. Can raw material suppliers be placed under a CCP? So when we develop our HACCP plan, that is covered under whatever activities are done at that site. So that means from receiving to shipping. So if you did have a CCP, or preventive control related to that incoming product when you receive it at that receiving step, that would be under FDA, would be called a supply chain preventive control. Or if it's just traditional HACCP, it would be, just a CCP. Or if it's, say, for example, the receiving of seafood, right? And you have to ensure that temperature, then yes, that CCP would be actually at the receiving step. It wouldn't be, an activity that's before that, because the HACCP food safety plan is those activities in which you undertake under your site, which is in the scope. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question. And that does look like that's all the questions we have for you guys today. So we do, once we close the webinar, we will have a post-webinar survey that we would love to get your thoughts on. And just know we are there for you from certification, compliance, sourcing, reporting, consulting, and training. Just reach out to us. And we will provide this deck to you, as well as a recording of this webinar. Again, thank you for joining, and we appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone.